There is a creature so small you could lose it between two fingers, and yet it has cracked one of the hardest problems in all of biology: how to turn a living animal into a nursery without killing it too soon. Not a trap, not a web. A living, breathing, eating host that keeps itself alive specifically so something else can grow inside it. And the host does not even try to escape. That is not a metaphor. That is the daily reality of parasitoid wasps. And once you understand the actual mechanism behind it, you will never look at a caterpillar the same way again. Most people who know about these wasps know the surface version. Wasp lays eggs inside a caterpillar. Larvae eat the caterpillar. Larvae emerge. That version is accurate, the same way saying a nuclear reactor boils water is accurate. Technically true, completely missing the point. The real story is about a degree of biological precision that should not be possible in something that evolved without a plan, a brain trust, or a goal. It just evolved, and it ended up here. Let's back up to the moment it starts, because that moment alone deserves more attention than it usually gets. The female wasp, take Cotesia glomerata as one of the best documented examples, locates a caterpillar not by sight but by chemical signal. When a plant is being eaten, it releases a specific blend of volatile compounds, a distress signal that has been co-opted by these wasps over millions of years of pressure. The wasp does not find the caterpillar directly. She finds the plant's alarm, follows it, and the caterpillar is at the end of that trail. That alone is a remarkable sensory feat. But what she does next is where things get genuinely strange. She drives her ovipositor, a needle-like egg-laying organ, through the caterpillar's cuticle and deposits somewhere between 20 and 80 eggs, depending on the species. Along with those eggs, she injects something that most documentary narration glosses over because it does not fit neatly into the predator-prey framework people expect. She injects polynoviruses, and these are not incidental passengers. They are integrated into the wasp's own genome, inherited from mother to daughter, replicated in the wasp's ovaries specifically for this purpose. They are not infecting the wasp. They are part of the wasp, and their entire biological function is to be injected into something else. Once inside the caterpillar's hemolymph, the insect equivalent of blood, these viruses begin expressing proteins that systematically dismantle the host's immune response. Insects do not have adaptive immunity the way vertebrates do. They have hemocytes, immune cells that detect foreign bodies and encapsulate them in a process called melanotic encapsulation. It's essentially walling off the threat in a hardened capsule until it suffocates. This is what should happen to the wasp eggs. Without the virus, the caterpillar's immune system would identify each egg as foreign, surround it, and neutralize it within hours. The virus prevents exactly that. It suppresses hemocyte function, blocks the signaling cascades that would trigger encapsulation, and essentially sends the immune system a continuous false negative. Nothing to see here. Keep moving. The eggs sit there, untouched, in the body of an animal whose defense system is still running, but has been surgically redirected away from them. That is not brutality. That is pharmacology. The wasp is not overpowering the caterpillar's immune system. She is reprogramming it. The difference matters because overpowering leaves wreckage. Reprogramming leaves a functional host. And a functional host is exactly what the larvae are going to need. When the eggs hatch, the larvae do not begin eating randomly. This is the part that stops most biologists cold the first time they really sit with it. The larvae begin consuming hemolymph and fat body tissue, the insect equivalent of fat reserves, in a sequence that preserves the caterpillar's core organ function for as long as biologically possible. The gut keeps working. The nervous system keeps running. The heart keeps beating. The caterpillar keeps eating leaves. It is not dead. It is not even visibly sick yet. It is just slowly being hollowed out from the inside, and it does not know because knowing would require a brain sophisticated enough to register what is happening. Which brings us to the question of what the wasp larvae actually understand about what they are doing. The honest answer is nothing. There is no plan. There is no decision-making. What there is the product of selection pressure so consistent and so long-running that the larvae which happened to avoid vital organs left more descendants than the larvae which did not. Over time, that behavioral tendency, avoid the heart, avoid the ventral nerve cord, became fixed. It is now instinct in the most literal sense. A behavioral output encoded in the genome, executed without deliberation, maintained because the alternative produced dead hosts and therefore dead larvae. This is the thing about evolution that is genuinely hard to hold in your head. The precision is not evidence of design. It is evidence of how ruthlessly selection eliminates imprecision. Every larva that accidentally hit the wrong tissue produced a host that died before the larvae could complete development. Those lineages ended. The ones that are here today are the descendants of thousands of generations of not making that mistake. The result looks like surgical skill. It is actually the scar tissue of mass extinction playing out on a microscopic scale, over and over for millions of years. Now here is where it gets worse, or better, depending on your perspective. When the larvae are ready to emerge, and this is a synchronized event, not a gradual straggle, they do not just push through the cuticle passively. They chew through it from the inside in a burst that takes only a few hours. The caterpillar is still alive during this. In some recorded cases, the caterpillar barely moves. Its feeding behavior may have already started to change. It eats less, moves less, becomes less responsive to stimuli. And researchers at Wageningen University have documented that this behavioral shift is not random deterioration. It is induced. The larvae or their metabolic byproducts appear to alter neurochemical signaling in the host before emergence, shifting the caterpillar toward a state of reduced activity that happens to make it a safer, more stable platform for what comes next. Once outside, the larvae spin cocoons directly on the caterpillar's body surface. And what happens at this stage is, in my view, the single most extraordinary thing in this entire sequence. A small number of larvae, in some species, 1 or 2, do not emerge. They remain inside the caterpillar, and they take up residence near the central nervous system. The caterpillar, which should now logically try to escape or resume normal behavior, or at minimum stop cooperating with its own parasites, instead does something that looks for all the world like voluntary bodyguard duty. It positions itself over the cocoon cluster. It stops feeding entirely. And when other predatory insects, parasitoid enemies, predatory wasps, even ants, approach the cocoon mass, the caterpillar thrashes. It swings its head. It flails. It drives them away. It is protecting the things that just ate it from the inside out. The mechanistic explanation for this, based on work by researchers including Janardhan Bhatt and further developed in studies published in journals including PLOS One, points to direct neural manipulation. The remaining larvae appear to affect the caterpillar's motor outputs in a way that triggers defensive thrashing in response to vibration and contact stimuli. The same stimuli that would be produced by a predator approaching the cocoon mass. The caterpillar is not deciding to guard. It is responding to stimuli with behavior that has been rerouted. The decision-making circuits are still there. They are just receiving different instructions. What we are looking at is not mind control in the science fiction sense. It is targeted neuromodulation. The same basic category of mechanism that psychoactive compounds use in vertebrate nervous systems, just deployed by a larva on an insect over a timescale of days. The caterpillar's behavior has been modified not by removing its agency, but by inserting a new behavioral output that happens to serve the wasp's interests. If that makes you uncomfortable, it should. Because the caterpillar is, in the most functional sense, still working, still processing, still responding. It just has a different objective now. The caterpillar does not recover. Once the adult wasps chew through their cocoons and fly away, which they do within roughly 10 to 14 days of emerging, the remaining larvae inside the host die as well. The caterpillar, which has not eaten since emergence day and has spent its final days in constant motor exertion, collapses. Death is not dramatic. It is just the end of a process that was, from the wasp's perspective, complete. Now, I want to spend a moment on the evolutionary economics of this, because most discussions skip it entirely and go straight to the horror, which is understandable, but leaves out something important. What the wasp has evolved is not a simple killing strategy. It is a resource management strategy. The difference is significant. A direct predator kills immediately and consumes immediately. That is efficient but wasteful. You burn through your prey at the rate you eat it, which means you are dependent on continuous finding and killing. A parasitoid wasp has solved a much harder problem. How do you extend the usable lifespan of a resource while still extracting maximum energy from it? You need the host to keep metabolizing, to keep converting leaf material into the hemolymph and fat body tissues your larvae will consume, to keep doing the hard metabolic work of maintaining a living body, while your offspring ride that metabolism like a current. This is why the immune suppression has to be so precise. A dead caterpillar cannot eat. A caterpillar that launches a full immune response strong enough to kill the eggs cannot incubate them. The wasp needs a host that is alive enough to be useful, but compromised enough to be safe for the larvae. That is an extraordinarily narrow window, and the polynavirus system threads it reliably enough to sustain hundreds of species of parasitoid wasps across every continent except Antarctica. There are more than 50,000 described species of parasitoid wasps. Estimates of undescribed species push that number considerably higher, with some researchers suggesting the true figure may be closer to 150,000 to 600,000. They prioritize caterpillars, aphids, whiteflies, beetle larvae, fly pupae, spider egg sacs, and in some cases other parasitoid wasps. The diversity of host types has driven a corresponding diversity of manipulation strategies, delivery mechanisms, and developmental timing. What Cotesia glomerata does with polynaviruses, other genera achieve through different molecular pathways, different venom compositions, different egg surface proteins. The convergence of outcome, a living, compromised, exploitable host, has been reached by multiple independent evolutionary routes. That kind of convergence is not coincidence. It is a signal that this particular strategy sits in a region of biological problem space, where the payoff is high enough that selection keeps finding its way there, regardless of starting point. Which raises a question that does not get asked enough. What does this mean for the host species? Because the caterpillar is not simply a passive victim in this evolutionary story. It is also under selection pressure continuously in the opposite direction. Every caterpillar that happened to have an immune variant slightly more resistant to the polynavirus suppression had a marginally better chance of surviving an oviposition event. Those lineages are still here too. The host is not static. The caterpillar lineages that have coexisted with parasitoid wasps the longest show more sophisticated immune responses, more varied hemocyte behavior, more complex cuticular defenses against oviposition in the first place. This is an ongoing arms race, and the wasp is not winning it permanently. It is winning each round narrowly, by enough, which is all that evolution ever requires. The agricultural application of this arms race is where the story stops being purely biological and starts being directly relevant to how food gets grown. Because the same specificity that makes parasitoid wasps such effective manipulators makes them extraordinarily useful as targeted pest control agents. A wasp that parasitizes Pieris brassicae, the large white butterfly caterpillar, a major agricultural pest on cruciferous crops, does not attack beneficial insects with the same precision. The chemical Q system that locates hosts is tuned to specific volatile blends, specific contact chemicals on specific cuticle surfaces. The wasp does not generalize the way a broad-spectrum insecticide does. It finds what it was selected to find. The commercial application of this is already substantial and growing. Programs using Trichogramma species, egg parasitoids that attack the eggs of moth and butterfly pests, are deployed across millions of hectares of agricultural land globally, including in Europe, China, and parts of Central America. In California, releases of Aphytis melinus to control California red scale on citrus have been standard practice since the 1960s. The economics are increasingly favorable as pesticide resistance in target pests continues to develop and as regulatory pressure on synthetic chemicals tightens in multiple jurisdictions. The specificity and self-propagating nature of parasitoid programs becomes more valuable, not less. A pesticide application ends when the chemical degrades. A parasitoid introduction, under the right conditions, establishes a population that continues working through subsequent generations. There is also a harder question embedded in this. We tend to frame biological control as the natural alternative, which carries an implicit safety guarantee that the actual science does not fully support. A misapplied parasitoid introduction, one that attacks a non-target host in a new environment, can produce ecological disruption that is difficult to reverse, precisely because the agent is self-propagating. The introduction of Compsilura conchinata in North America to control gypsy moth also parasitized dozens of native silk moth species, contributing to population declines that have not recovered in over a century. The specificity that makes parasitoid wasps valuable is a default tendency, not an absolute constraint. It can fail under selection pressure when the wasp encounters a new environment with novel host options and reduced competition. The tool is powerful. The tool has a failure mode. Those two statements coexist without contradiction. What I keep coming back to, thinking about this organism, is what it reveals about the structure of biological complexity. We tend to assume that sophisticated behavior, precise targeting, resource management, behavioral modification of another animal requires a sophisticated nervous system. The wasp does not have one, at least not by vertebrate standards. It has roughly 1 million neurons, compared to our roughly 86 billion. And yet it executes a multi-step strategy that involves chemical navigation, immune suppression via viral injection, staged larval consumption that preserves host function, and in some species, neural manipulation of the host into a post-emergence bodyguard. Not because it thought it through, because every component of that strategy was independently selected for in a context where not having it meant death. That is the thing that is actually worth sitting with. Not the horror of the caterpillar's situation, which is real, but also applies equally to the caterpillar eating the leaf that is also, in some sense, fighting for its life. What is worth sitting with is that the line between sophisticated and simple, between planned and automatic, between purposeful and reflexive, is much less stable than we assume. The wasp's behavior looks designed because the problem it solves is genuinely complex, and the solution is genuinely precise. Design is the story we tell. Selection pressure under resource competition is the mechanism that actually produced it. Every organism you can name is a solution to a problem. The problem is survival and reproduction in a specific environment against specific competition. The solution is whatever got encoded into the genome of the ones that survived long enough to reproduce. Some of those solutions are beautiful by human aesthetic standards. Some are disturbing. Some, like this one, are both at the same time. The wasp does not know it is disturbing. It is just executing a program that worked. The caterpillar does not know it has been reprogrammed. It is just responding to stimuli with the outputs it has left. And somewhere between those two facts is the actual nature of biological life on this planet. Not noble, not cruel, not purposeful, not random, but something that resists all of those labels because it is simply operating on a different logic than the one we use to evaluate it. If you take anything from this, let it be that. Next time you find yourself assuming that an animal's behavior reflects a feeling, an intention, a choice, ask what the selection pressure was. Ask what the mechanism is. Ask who benefits and at what cost, and why the cost was sustainable enough that this behavior is still here. That question will not always give you a comfortable answer, but it will give you a more accurate one.